everyone, and welcome to the Venture Playbook Podcast by SIA. This is the podcast where we dive deep into the world of venture building, innovation, and growth, speaking with leaders who are pushing the boundaries in their industries. I'm your co-host today, Emily Orlik. I'm an innovation manager here at SIA. I'm joined by my co-host, Ambre, Julhia, and today we have a fantastic guest joining us, Barry Lunn, the founder and CEO of Provizio. Barry has had a fascinating career. He started off at an aero defense company in France, where he worked his way up to becoming the CEO within 10 years. He then started his own company called Orlik, which specialized in radar technology and was bought in a $50 million deal in 2017. Shortly after that, he started working on his latest endeavor, Provizio, a deep tech company that's on a mission to prevent road accidents. Barry, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Emily and Ambre. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you.
So we'll get straight into it, Barry. You founded Provizio in 2019, I believe. Can I ask you very simply, why?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Actually, it was an interesting one. I had started in Provizio, as you mentioned, is in the vehicle industry and that side of things, and I had just started working on autonomous vehicles in my previous company, and I realized pretty quickly that they weren't coming anytime soon. And we knew the reason for that was safety. So it's actually quite reasonable to get to what looks like a good outcome in autonomous vehicles quite quickly, where it drives around 90% of the time safely and well in lovely weather and all that. But the last piece was the piece that it was getting stuck on. They call it the edge cases, but it's also the reason we crash, right? And that side of things. And I actually, looked at that and went, so safety is going to be the reason autonomy doesn't succeed. But also safety was a much more interesting mission. And you mentioned, I just sold, my previous company. So I had less reason to work from a financial point of view. So I needed a mission. I needed something I could get my teeth into. And I thought, what about saving millions of lives rather than driving around in circles in Arizona? And then I went out and talked to the smart people, which is the first thing I always do, and told them what I was thinking and, see what they thought. And they pretty much were as crazy as me and thought, actually, I think we could solve this. And then a mission comes together very quickly, right? When you firmly believe, hey, we could save millions of lives a year, guys, if we put our technology to good. Okay, let's do it. And a market will follow. Solve a really good mission, markets will follow.
And was there a particular moment that sparked that journey, that idea for Provizio for you?
Yeah, I think what concentrated the mind, you'll be surprised to know, was another car crash. I was living in Vienna at the time, and I had come home for an event in Ireland, and I was driving down, and the weather changed very suddenly, and there was essentially 9 cars crashed within the space of a couple of minutes. And it was scary, right? And I crashed. I was lucky I was able to save the vehicle because because of the industry I was working in, I'd gotten to do some of these advanced driving courses that allowed me to bring the vehicle stable. It wasn't such a good outcome for a lot of people. But that night when I went home, I didn't go, okay, I'm scared of driving from now on and I don't want to do this. I actually just started thinking, okay, could have prevented that accident? Could tech have prevented that accident? And actually, could it have helped all the other guys, right? And it was a weather event, a freak weather event that changed, and therefore everyone's visibility and traction was disappeared very quickly. And this is what often happens. So that was kind of a real moment where I went, hang on. Okay, get out the pen and paper and start. And I literally did those first drawings that night of what a system would look like to solve the problem. And within weeks, I was talking to my co-founders.
Amazing, brilliant to hear that story, Barry, especially because I believe you were originally going to be an artist. Is that right? How did you end up in this space?
Yeah, I definitely have an unusual journey, but well, I guess for deep tech, I have an unusual journey. For entrepreneurship, probably not so unusual. So I was a school dropout, which is almost a stereotype. Struggled with dyslexia, undiagnosed. People, we didn't know what that was in Ireland in the 80s and 90s, so we diagnosed it as laziness. But I knew I wasn't lazy. But then I found art, right? And that I think really was something I could focus on, and that satisfied my curiosity, I guess, right? So I actually studied art in university, but very quickly realized I don't have the patience to be an artist, right? Or the talent, by the way. But design really suited me. I really like design, and that's what actually led me on the path of problem solving. Okay, this is interesting. And it also brought out the tech side because the web emerged. So designers had a new place we could go. We could develop websites, and we could develop very interesting software front ends and things like that. So that's the rabbit hole I went down, which is actually what drove me into deep tech, right? Because it's a weird one. When I look back, it was more like I just kept looking for harder and harder problems. And I do think that's a little bit of a dyslexic mindset of like wanting to solve big problems. And so as I developed that, it just naturally brought me into deeper and deeper tech. So I was building the superficial front end of a company with a website, but then I wanted to build, well, what about the software that the customer uses? All right, I want to build a front end of that. Yeah, but what about the bit that goes on under the hood? And suddenly I was in deep tech and getting really involved in the deeper engineering side, which was really, really interesting.
No, that's super interesting that you're saying that this art background feeds into what you're doing in Provizio, into the tech side. Because I wanted to ask a little bit more about the detail of what you do in Provizio, like the products. What did you actually develop? I know it's linked to AI, for example, which is a super interesting topic at the moment. Like everyone wants to know more about it. So, what is it more specifically that you developed?
Yeah, so very differently to my previous company where we focused on the sensor, right? We built the analog sensor that solved the problem, and it cost a certain amount, right? But with Provizio, we started looking more at the problem. And that meant starting from the chip level. So we developed technology from the chip level right through to the artificial intelligence layer that helps the vehicle navigate in dangerous situations, right? So that's quite a broad spectrum. But the other key to what we were developing was scale. We recognized that to solve a big problem, you have to be able to do it at scale. So what we've done is we've developed a bunch of new techniques in both hardware and software, right? That helps us reduce the size, weight, and power of sensors, but most importantly, the cost, right? And that to get into advanced driver assistance systems, and that's the key thing. The piece that helps you drive. So people think of it as cruise control a lot of the time, or lane centering and things like that. So this is like that on steroids, right? So to kind of give you perspective on the tech we've developed, right? The analog radars we were building in my previous company that we sold to the autonomous vehicle industry, and these were great times. We were selling those for $100,000 a sensor, right? That was the cost base for those analog sensors. In Provizio, we've developed software-defined radars, right, with AI embedded that outperform those sensors, and it's $50 a sensor, right? $100,000 to $50, 2,000 times cheaper. And that's critical because you know what the radar on your vehicle today costs in regular vehicles is $50. And we learned very quickly, unless you can hit that same price point, we won't get to solve all these other problems because automotive and others, they struggle with margins. They struggle with these things. So that's really been the big challenge for us, is making that technology, because the market is growing exponentially, right? So in a timeline where automotive is pretty stagnant, right? Margins are almost zero, right? Advanced driver assistance system market is going through the roof, right? And I was only reading today that in China, in 2014, in China, 1% less than 1% of vehicles had advanced driver assistance systems embedded in them, right? That's now over 55% in China, right? And Europe is going in the exact same direction. I reckon by 2030, like 80% of vehicles will have these type of advanced driver assistance system. And that's been driven as well by regulation and lots of other stuff. So that's really, I guess we spotted that trend early, and then we focused on building a tech that could do that, but at scale and cost.
It's very interesting that you're talking about scaling, because we do have a few questions about growth and scaling from the point of view of a business, like business growth. But we'll ask them a little bit later. I would have one now, which is more about who are your customers? Like, who are you targeting? Who are you speaking to? You're talking obviously about the automotive industry, but it might have applications in others. So in automotive, who are you targeting exactly, and where could it be expanded?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, because we, on a day-to-day level, we work actually all across mobility, completely, right? So if you need to, essentially, if you need to understand moving objects in all conditions, you're probably talking to us, right? So automotive is outsized because it's just such a huge market, right? And in that space, we work with the biggest OEMs and tier one. So the OEMs are the guys that build the cars. The tier ones are the guys that supply them, right? And the tier ones are often bigger than some of the OEMs that they supply, right? So like when I talk about tier ones, number one in the world is Bosch. Number two is Denso, Continental, household names, right? Magna, ZF, these huge companies. They're the guys that ultimately put the tech on, sell the tech to the car makers. But because we do everything, including software and the perception side, we work with both. So the OEMs have to then be able to unlock their drive planning and control, working with us. But then on the industrial side of the thing, we work like applications like mining, agriculture, smart cities applications. They're growing huge for us. And they'll be actually, in terms of design win and mass production, they'll be the first places that our technology is mass produced into, because they move a little quicker. The volumes aren't as big. They're still pretty big, right? And like you're talking about the big companies in those spaces. Obviously Caterpillar is the world number one. You've got the John Deere's, the Komatsu's. These guys, they're the big guys in that. They sell a lot of units, and they're expensive units. So they can obviously have maybe more advanced sensors, but also trucking and these type of places where there's actually a different struggle. It's not just safety, it's actually getting drivers, people to do that. So if they can automate a lot of tasks, there's a lot of pull there. And then in smart cities, like you've companies like Cisco who, want every intersection in the world to be smart. Right? They want traffic management systems. They want to do the backhaul for that. There's so many companies working in that space, monitoring traffic, labeling, all of that. Sensors that are able to understand those environments. There's huge appetite for that. So basically, if it moves, we're probably tracking it. And that's where our growth is going to be.
Okay, no, good. And you're mentioning all these companies that are huge groups, international. You started the company in Ireland. Was there any? What do you think are the advantages of starting a business in Ireland, or maybe disadvantages? How's the business landscape here in Ireland?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose the most honest answer I can give, and the biggest compliment I think I can pay to Ireland, is I spent much of my career abroad, right? Almost half of it, right? Living outside of Ireland, because primarily I was working in aerospace, right? And that means not being in Ireland because there's no market, and that's where the customers were. But when I was starting my last company, Rallis, I moved back to Ireland. And then, to scale it, I ended up moving again. And then when I was starting Provizio, I moved back again, right? And there was a really important reason for that. And that reason is people, right? We have really good engineering talent in Ireland across electronics, but also AI. Like AI is now being kind of recognized as that Ireland is actually a powerhouse for AI talent, and people underestimate that when they see US multinationals moving here. They're moving here for talent, right? And that's another reason we're here. And like some of the earliest people, some of our investors, in fact, private investors, they developed the AI chip, the Movidius AI chip, more than 20 years ago, right? And two Irish guys founded that company, and they're now, they sold that to Intel, so it became the backbone of Intel's AI escapades. And that was more than 20 years ago. And I think the other advantage in Ireland, because we're an island, right? We think global. we kind of think global from the beginning. You know what I mean? You grow up thinking, I'm going to go to America, I'm going to go to Europe, I'm going to go to Asia, right? So, and I think that's just embedded in our mindset, which is great, right? If you want to grow a startup, you do have to leave the island, right? And that's a very important thing. And I think the state supports that really well. So I think Enterprise Ireland is actually a little bit of a superpower, right? They've networks all over the globe. They'll support you financially, but I think their soft supports are more important. That introduction, that these little things, and we really take advantage of that. I think the fact that we're the only English-speaking country in the EU as well appeals to people around, the globe. But you mentioned challenges, right? Like the challenge is just so obvious. It's the lack of capital, right? Capital is elsewhere, right? And especially risk capital, right? So people think, Ireland's rich, right? There's an awful lot of money sitting in banks here, and we obviously have a government that's doing quite well, right? But risk capital, we're extremely poor on, right? That's where Silicon Valley is always going to kick our butt, and London kicks our butt as well. So for significant venture investment, you do have to leave Ireland realistically, right? We don't have a strong venture capital industry in Ireland. And that can often lead to people just moving the company, which is the unfortunate piece. So if you take two of the big successes, right, Stripe and Intercom, right, why were they, essentially US companies from the outset, even though they're completely Irish genetically? It was because of capital. You want to build a big multi-billion-dollar company, you can't do it in Ireland without capital, right? And what's great about those guys is they're coming back, that's the tie to Ireland, and they're coming back for the people and the scale. But at the same time, if we really want to build, billion-dollar companies in Ireland, we've got to solve the capital thing.
Yeah. And just you mentioned Enterprise Ireland. Could you just super quickly for our listeners just explain what they do? It's an organization that actually SIA works with, and they're great. Just in a few words, so our listeners know who they are.
Yeah, so Enterprise Ireland are a state body, an Irish state body, and their goal is to help people export, right? To drive exports and grow jobs in Ireland. That's their mission, right? And so any company that wants to build a company of scale with people and try and keep some of them in Ireland, and export into international markets, they recognize that the Irish market isn't big enough. They will help you, and they'll do that in numerous ways. With, as I mentioned, like the financial support. So pretty much every startup in Ireland is co-funded by Enterprise Ireland. They're an investor in us. But they also have other supports where they invest in disruptive technologies, where they actually cover the investment in the European Space Agency. So especially my last company and also in this company, we've been really lucky with that, working with the European Space Agency, and Enterprise Ireland really man that. And also the EU funding. So they're the guys that help you on that path as well, because there is significant EU funding out there as well. They'll help you access that. And then they have this network of international offices, which is insane, right? Because I can turn up in Japan or China tomorrow, an Enterprise Ireland, and I want to bring a big customer, to show them what we have. Enterprise Ireland will bring them to the embassy and invite them to dinner, that customer with me. And they might not know where Ireland is, but they know where the bloody embassy is. And it's a superpower. It really is a superpower. So I'm obviously going to leech onto that, right?
Yeah. No, thank you so much.
So, Barry, you've got this massive mission to save lives. You're using this cutting edge technology. Arguably, starting a new company from scratch is tough. 1 minute, you're big picture, the next, you're in the weeds. How do you balance all of that as an entrepreneur and also just as an individual?
Yeah, it's really tough. So I'm not a sugar-coated guy, right? Startups are hard. Most founders or potential founders that come to me for advice, I advise them to do something else. One of the companies I'm in, I do some angel investing. One of the companies that are doing really well that came from me advice, I don't even remember it. They were apparently weeks trying to get in front of me. They were young guys who were in college and they were dropping out. And when I spoke to them first day, they told me their vision, and I said, could you get a job? And their hearts sank. But that's okay. I'm okay with a bit of tough love, right? Because it doesn't matter how complex the problem, like we're trying to solve, is a bloody complex problem. It's nothing compared to dealing with like market movements and things like that, which have a huge impact on, your day to day. So you can be building the best technology in the world, but when tariffs come along, hey, you've got a problem, right? And you can't control that. Or when your customer has a significant downsizing, it doesn't matter that, within the company, their ADAS market's growing like this, but their general automotive is going like that. Everything gets cut, right? And I think that's really difficult. And also funding is difficult, right? You especially when there's uneven times like now, right, where no one knows really what's happening. So that's the tough bit, right? I was lucky because with Provizio, especially because I had some previous success, right? And that gets you over an awful lot of those early indicators, right, where people are a bit nervous. But eventually, that kind of gloss runs out, right? And the company has to stand on its own 2 feet. So I think having that, but I think the big thing I think that helps me on that is actually working with really good people. Like the team I work with 30 people now, they're incredible people. I literally love, to the point of I kind of need to learn to turn off, because I just want to hear every team's message. I want to read every email, every Confluence page that gets put up on our wiki. I'm there reading it because they're incredible people and I love working with them. Equally, I avoid the negative people, right? Because you just can't, right? There's enough negative in startup land that I just, you got to avoid those people at all levels across in your own company and investors and everybody else.
And on that topic, I'm curious, how would you describe yourself as a leader? Or maybe that team you're talking about, how might they describe you as a leader?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'd like to think the team would describe me as a servant leader, because that's what I seek to be. I think I mentioned earlier about the dyslexia side of things, right? So I can be a frustrated person, because the thing with dyslexia is you often have this helicopter view where you see the outcome and you know where something's going to end up. And I would call that the dyslexic advantage, right? So I see the solution quickly. And so I want to get there. I want to get there quick, right? But I guess with experience, what I've learned, and from a leadership point of view, is I can't get there on my own, right? Just it's my own limitations. I understand, and I understand them very well. So I need to bring people together to solve big problems. So that means creating a honeypot and creating a work environment that the smartest people want to work in and do their best work, right? And that's where, I came across agile. And I think agile is really important to how I see the world. And that's why I described it as servant leadership, because that's how agile works, right? Is everybody, helping everybody else break down the task and then giving people autonomy to go and solve that. But there's no point in giving people autonomy and then expecting them to be in 6 hours of meetings every day and then wondering why you haven't developed anything. So if I think there's anything I'm actually good at, is creating an environment that smart people want to work in and leaving them alone to do the work. And so we put an awful lot of effort into that. And our whole agile approach is designed to ensure people aren't in meetings, they're problem solving, right? And bringing that voice. And I see my job then is bring that voice to the customer and to bring more people around to bring that voice to the customer, so we can just set the direction, right? Just here's where we've got to nudge it a little bit, guys. Big vision hasn't changed, right? We're still going, that's the North Star, but we got to do a little nudge here, a little nudge there, and everyone buys into that. And so I'm extremely open about everything. Everyone in our organization understands our finances, our challenges, our customers that said no, our customers that said yes. Completely open communication style. I'm too old to be fooling anyone, right? And I take that across the board with investors, and a lot of people, they want to be told a story, but I'll give it to you straight, because I do think it attracts the right people on board. And I think that's helped us build a team. And that team is now creating the team, right? Like I'm really responsible for the first 10 hires, right? After that, it's about people seeing this is how we do things here. Now I'm going to bring in the next 10 and the next 10. And I think that's really been my leadership style, which doesn't come naturally, by the way, because I'm a control freak by nature, right? That's something but it's something that I had to nurture and make sure I could do. Otherwise, no one would work with me. So yeah, so I got to stay out of the way as much as possible.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you for giving us that glimpse into Provizio. It sounds like you've got a great thing going on there.
I wanted to go back to my scaling question. So growth strategies is something that we look at with our clients a lot. What was the growth strategy when you started the company, and what is it now?
Yeah, it actually hasn't changed, Ambre, and the reason is we had to think about scale from the beginning, because otherwise we would have built the technology very differently. So we would have actually, it would have been easier for us to build another kind of a Me Too with a bit of an AI glean on top of it, because no one was kind of doing that. And it would have been an easy win, and it would have been a place to go. But we didn't. We literally went down to the semiconductor level and started building from scratch, because we knew how big the problem was, right? And so it had to think about scale. What does change, I guess, a little bit along the way is where are you going to get your first level of scale, right? And where are you going to, what we describe as design wins, right? Who are the first tier ones and OEMs that are going to design in our products, right? And again, within that, our goal was we literally just created a top 10, right? Not of people we knew or traction with, which is what a lot of startups do, right? They kind of go to their board and say, here are our 10 best customers and this is where we're going. We didn't. We went, okay, if we had X company, Y company, and Z company, they would shift the needle completely, right? So let's focus completely on that. Let's focus on the top 10 companies that could change this company entirely. So we made that top 10 about 18 months ago. We work with all of that top 10 now, right? That's our path to scale. These guys could shift the needle significantly. Unfortunately, most of those people we can't talk about, right? But some of the ones that are more public are, so we said NVIDIA are building the platform of the future, right? The future of software-defined vehicles is going to be on things like NVIDIA platform. So we partnered with NVIDIA, right? And that's not easy as a startup, right? You're up against all the big guns. But we're there now, and we're working very closely with NVIDIA. We looked across chips and said, right, who's making the best radar chips, right, in this space? Texas Instruments, right. We got to partner with Texas Instruments. And that, again, is a public partnership. So we've all these kind of scaling partnerships. So, and outside of that, then it's the number one tier ones in the world, the number two tier ones, the biggest OEMs in the world, so you can probably guess the names, but then also the industrial type customers, right? Who are the best, right? I want to sell to the top guy, because then everybody else will follow, right? Like, the old saying, nobody ever got fired for buying from IBM. So that's our strategy. We've limited bandwidth. We've a small amount of people. So get number one in everything. And then you'll get number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. That's our strategy, right? And so those early design wins, as I mentioned, will primarily be in industrial, right? Because they're nearer term, and they're still great numbers. But then eventually those will start to filter into automotive, which has longer qualification times and all of that fun stuff. And that's how we will scale this, and we'll be very Trojan horse. We build in things into the sensors that, even though you as an OEM may not, maybe just interested in our sensor today, we leave space in there that you start to license our software in the future, right? So that's a big thing for us, is that we leave that space, because we're at the frontier in hardware and what the sensors are capable of. We've developed a ton of IP that we've registered around things that you can now do with these type of sensors that you could never do before, that enable perception, free space, classifying objects. And so we will then release that out into the market, and there's a huge appetite for that. And I think that's where the AI play comes into it as well, building the data set. So all of those customers I just described that we're working with, they're all sending us data. And the reason they do it is because we tell them, we've got this big data engine. If you send us your data, it gets better for your application, right? So it's got a heavy leaning to roads right now, right? So it's really good on roads and things like that, because that's where we've done a lot of our testing. So now we have our mining customers and our agricultural customers and others sending us tons of data because they wanted to be really good off-road, right? And they wanted to be really good in mines and underground and things like that. So they send us all that data, and our universal model keeps getting better. That universal model, that's going to have a ton of value long term, right? And that's going to be ultimately, I mentioned honeypots earlier, that's eventually going to be the honeypot that we're going to get everyone hooked on, right? And then start releasing that to them. So there's a very long answer, but that's the vision and for scale.
No, that's great. It's great. Shows great ambition. It's really good. I'll hand over to Emily for our last question, I think.
Perfect. Yes, a final question for you, Barry. If you had a magic wand, what would you wish for?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I presume on a business level rather than on a personal level, is the question. On a personal level, I'd probably just wish to quieten down my mind a little bit and focus from that point of view. On a business level, honestly, it's money. It's literally because the I know it's not a case of if we can solve the problem and if we can build a huge company. It's a question of when. And I do think, but now sometimes money can be a bad thing. We're at the right stage now where we want a lot of money to grow at scale, right? But sometimes you can get it too early and make bad decisions. So we'll say qualify my answer with the right money at the right time being available. Everything else, we've got it. We've got it.
Barry, thanks so much for joining us today on the Venture Playbook podcast and for all the fantastic insight.